who would have loved to have seen that on air. But it felt to us that moved past the emotional peak of the moment, that everything was implied in the kiss, and it's good to leave what happens next to the imagination. The way Stana and Nathan performed that scene was so raw and explosive that it felt like anything after that was a bit of a denouement and a bit of a pro forma letdown, no matter how passionate it looked. So ultimately, when you're in the editing room, and this is part of the scribble to screen, because you're always rewriting, and when you get to the editing room, you have the opportunity to rewrite again. You have the opportunity to shift the focus in the scene. You have the opportunity to cut out material that's not working, and oddly enough, taking away is often additive. Taking away lines gives the lines that are there more weight. Taking away images sometimes gives the images that are there significantly more weight.
We felt like when we were looking at it that was the powerful moment. That was the moment that we wanted to leave
The kiss.
you with, the kiss. And if they went to the bed, it took it a little bit too far. It wasn't as powerful as your imaginations and how you would imagine the rest of their evening to go. And so it's fun that it was a debate in the editing room, which we often have, about looking at things and wanting to save some of the stuff that was precious to us when we wrote it, and that seemed like it was wonderfully perfect for the moment when it was on the page. But as it turns out, on the screen it wasn't. And one of the things that Andrew said is that piece of film was not color timed, the second one you saw. And did you guys notice the difference in that? So that's one of the last processes, the color timing, the sound, the ADR that goes into that scene, and the music. And those are some of the last things we do. The last time we look at it before it goes to air is in playback with the sound guys, where we put all of those things together and modulate how big the thunderstorm is, and how, not dark or light necessarily, but how rich the colors are in the scene. We have a brilliant colorist on the show who just makes all of our material look amazing. And
that was actually nice, because the whole thing went yellow.
I can't see the screen, I just on the chair.
It's good Tony Smith, we're here. Color timing. But part of the process is setting mood and atmosphere when you go through color timing. You know, scenes that are, we've designated certain colors for certain emotional moods. There's a bluish green that we've used for Beckett's mother's murder mythology that you can see when Montgomery got shot in the airport hangar and in numerous places throughout the series. So these are all things that we pay attention to, that we know that people aren't necessarily seeing textually, but hopefully feeling subtextually in terms of creating a mood. And then again, you know, you have a chance to rewrite in the editing room if a point is not made precisely enough, or if we've missed something in performance.
Or sometimes, you know, there's a sound or something that's going on when we're shooting it that we can't hear what people are saying.
Yeah, that's when we do the ADR. You can put the ADR back. And so we go through, and there are various cues, and sometimes if we're on somebody else's face, if we're on, say, Beckett's face, we can have Castle, you know, say a line that is more precise, or we'll loop it so that you guys can hear it, because it may have been muffled on the day, or the actor may have swallowed the line on the day, and it's not as clear as we want it to be for you guys.
So the actors will come into the recording studio, and they'll re-say these lines over watching themselves on the screen in the moment. And it's a real skill to match yourself on screen, to match the mood, to match the moment.
To match the tone of voice.
Sometimes if they're walking and they have to do ADR, they have to stand there and go like this while they're talking, because it changes the way they talk. It's a really fun and interesting process. And we also have something fabulous called the loop group, who comes into ADR and fills in all the background noise of all the people talking. And those people are incredibly talented. So we're also grateful to them in helping us get it to the screen. Okay, so let's talk about editing on the air.
Let's talk about it.
Well, you said a lot of what we say there. The editing process. How long, Andrew, is the edit?
In terms of the process, or in terms of when a cut comes in?
Well, the cut starts coming into our editors as we're shooting. So every day the editor is getting material as we're shooting the show.
Now, ideally, the editor has 4 days with it after shoot. The director has 4 days, and then the producers have 4 days. That's ideally. It's never ideal. Usually at the end of the season, we're in accelerated post, and we have maybe 6 days altogether to edit the show, 6 or 5 days, and that's while we're doing other things. Sometimes cuts will come in long. You'll have 48 minutes of material, and we can only air 42, so we have to make judicious decisions, which I think is actually helpful to the process, because I'm a big proponent in writing in the iceberg theory, and that is, the more work you do, whether it's in script or whether it's in shooting, the more is underneath the iceberg that allows more to live above the surface. So if you don't have all this work that nobody sees underneath, your iceberg doesn't rise very high. It's just sort of sitting there on the surface, just a little bit above. And oftentimes we'll have lines that don't make the cut, but they inform the line that does, so that the line that does make the cut is delivered with intent. So editing is all about choices and all about directing the viewer experience.
So part of our post-production process are special effects. And one of the most amazing moments that we had in Always was a fight on the rooftop where Beckett has to confront, I forgot his name. You guys know his name, right? Beckett has to confront
the bad guy.
The bad guy.
Yeah.
It wasn't even his real name.
No.
And as much as, you know, Stana is up for anything, and as much as she wants to dangle from the side of a building, so we don't think that that's a judicious use of our talent, because we'd like to make more of them.
But she did do the fight. We had stunt people who were teaching the two people how to fight, and the fight was pretty intense. Do you have a photograph of the rooftop? That's the rooftop that we shot on at the Roslyn. And see the platform that they're on? That's where one of the places, can you go to the next picture? There's Donna standing on top of the platform, on top of the roof, with the sky above her. I thought that was pretty spectacular. And the fight itself was pretty spectacular, but what I wanted to show you was some of the special effects that allowed her to dangle from that roof. So can we show the clip of what you saw on television?
And note that this looks very much like Los Angeles when you're looking around. We do digital extensions in the background to make it look like New York.
Neither do you.
Okay, so, sorry about that.
When we assemble it in the editing room, we don't have access to those elements because we add them in post, and you don't want to pay for visual effects that you're not going to use in the show because they're very expensive. So you assemble it with all the green screen elements and with the sets you have, and we had a stunt woman hanging from the side of the building, and then we did some stuff with sun in it, so we'll show you that. And if the person over there could hit that light again so they can see our apologies.
Also, I wanted to tell you about in the writing of this scene, her falling off the roof from that side was not our original concept. Our original concept is that they would leap across buildings. And so both of them were going to leap from one building to another.
That she would be so committed to chasing him. And we found 2 buildings where you actually could have made the jump, that he would have made the jump and she didn't. It turned out to be prohibitively expensive to do that stunt, so we had to rewrite the stunt. And this is a process in television. You dream big, and then they say, you can't do that. You don't have the money for that. So we had to restructure and restage it to create a moment that was hopefully equally as compelling.
And figure out the right reasons in script for her to go after him and then end up hanging from the roof. But now we're going to show you what it looked like before all the beautiful special effects were added.
Oh, God.
Studio?
Oh, no. Come on, no.
So all of that. In case you weren't familiar with the whistle, you will be by the end of the day. So that was, we recreated our set department, who are brilliant because, you know, I think Castle's Loft is just one of the most beautiful sets I've ever seen. They recreated the side of the building. And
To match the one that we had on location.
right.
And the reason why we're dwelling on this stuff is that this is very much part of the writing process. The writing process, in terms of guiding the audience and being able to tell the story, goes all the way through post-production. You know, the point where you're up against production constraints. You can do this, you can't do that. You have to work around actors' hours. You have to work around, you know, all sorts of things in order to get the story told. So, you know, enormous constraints that we work under, but you try to make those constraints advantages in the storytelling.
Also, this is stepping a little farther back than this. When we are producing an episode, and all of our writers actually produce their own episodes, and I think one of the really interesting things that some people don't know about television, and all shows are different, all shows do it differently, but our shows, the writer is the producer of the episode and shepherds their episode all the way through from conception to completion. And the writers have a lot of responsibilities other than just writing. And part of their responsibility is when we're writing, they, is to realize what is producible and what's not producible. And the more you go through this process, the more you know what you can write about. You have to be responsible in the writing.
You know, we have Castle owns a bar called the Old Haunt, and a lot of fans are like, oh, when are you going to go back to the Old Haunt? And I'm thinking, how do I get back to the Old Haunt without paying the location fee, parking the trucks? You know, and if I'm doing that for one scene and it's not part of storytelling, then I have to cut off another avenue of storytelling. The money's being spent there as opposed to somewhere else. So, you know, in story, you're looking for a good reason to do it, as opposed to just doing it. There'd be lots of really fun stuff that we would do if we had unlimited time and unlimited budget.
And unlimited space. I mean, some of it is stage space, and one of the things that you have in a series are standing sets that you use. And our show in particular in production, a lot of people ask this question. We shoot for 8 days normally. Some episodes are 7 days.
When we're trying to save money.
Right. And some days, most episodes are 5 days in the studio and 3 days out. There are other permutations. There are, you know.
Our typical pattern is 5 and 3. Oftentimes we're 6 in the studio, 2 out. But every time we go out, it costs us money. It costs us money to park the trucks. It costs us in location fees. So.
And you know, we're shooting LA for New York. So that's an interesting process too. But to get back to the production designers, they mimic on stage for stunts and for a lot of other things what we find out in the world. I don't know if any of you saw The Lives of Others, but
The 100th episode.
The 100th episode, which it says we're talking about. So that building that Castle was peering into through his binoculars, a lot of that, we had a real building that we looked out of, but most of it was shot on stage because our production design team recreated that building on a stage. And that's always amazing to me. I'm always just overwhelmed by how talented all the craft people who do all these things are. So that's why I feel like it's our privilege to write this stuff, because our crew and all the creative people just render it so beautifully. The next thing we're going to go to is a scene that you saw on TV. It's let's show the scene first. The scene between Castle and Beckett in Beckett's place, when he tells her he knows.
And after this, we'll sort of step into the writing process and show you the kind of work that goes into creating a scene like this. And this is a seminal scene, so it's a scene that we worked on a great deal.
Yeah, like.
By lying to me about the most important thing in my life.
That lie was the only thing that was protected.
Castle, I didn't need protection. I needed a lead. And you sat on it for a year. Now, who is this person? How do I find him?
He's a voice on the phone. He's a shadow in a parking garage.
You met with him? How do you know that he's not behind my mom's murder? How do you know that he's not involved? And how the hell could you do this?
Because I love you.
Oh, snap.
You didn't know that, don't you? You've known for about a year.
Are you kidding me? You're actually bringing this up right now.
Double snap.
After you told me that you just...
Okay, listen to me.
Listen to you? Why should I listen to you? How am I even supposed to trust anything that you say?
Howie? Because of everything we've been through together. 4 years, I've been right here. 4 years just waiting for you to open your eyes to see that I'm right here. And I'm more than a partner. Every morning I bring you a cup of coffee just so I can see a smile on your face, because I think you are the most remarkable, maddening, challenging, frustrating person I've ever met. And I love you, Kate, and if that means anything to you, if you care about me at all, just don't do this.
If I care about you, Castle, you cut a deal for my life like I was some kind of a child. My life. Mine. You don't get to decide.
You keep going with this, they're gonna decide. They're gonna come for you, Kate.
Let them come. They sent Coonan and he is dead. They sent Lockwood and he is dead. And I am still here, Castle, and I am ready.
Ready for what? To die for your cause? This isn't a murder investigation anymore, Kate. They turned it into a war.
If they want a war, then I will bring them a war. Straight to their doorsteps.
Well, I guess there's just nothing I can say, is there? Okay, yeah, you're right, kid. It's your life. You can throw it away if you want, but I'm not gonna stick around and watch you, so this is, over. I'm done.
Lighthearted dramedy.
Okay, so,
Let's talk about that scene for a moment. We knew how we wanted to end the show, and you saw how we ended the show, the two of them getting together. Good storytelling dictates that kind of at the halfway point of that journey in this episode, that they're at the farthest point. And this scene is actually the culmination of 4 seasons of mythology that starts with Castle in the pilot deconstructing Beckett, and then in episode 5 discovering the truth about Beckett's mother's murder, and then going through the various touch points along the way in terms of this conspiracy, and us understanding that Kate's fatal flaw is that she will put blinders on and run out into traffic to get the answer to this question. So we knew that we were servicing the ghosts of 6, 7, 8 significant mythology episodes in this scene, and it was part of the arc of their relationship. So there was a lot of pressure to get this scene right, and we knew that we had to do it in a way where the ending felt organic and honest and explosive as well, and that she had her realization in that moment on the rooftop. So there's a reason why we're showing you the kiss, the rooftop, and this scene. It's all very much of a piece, because it's on the rooftop where Beckett realizes that the only person she wants to be with is Castle in that moment where she's really confronting death, that none of that other stuff matters, and that's part of her past, and he's part of her future. So getting this scene right was important to me and Terri, because it was, getting this scene right was important to us delivering on the promise that we had made to you guys about the show and about who these people were. So we went through a couple of drafts.
Yeah, is this the first one that you have up?
The green draft.
Okay, so that's farther down. Is that the last one?
Hold on a second. It goes, there's 6 different versions. I had green, yellow, pink, blue, production, and studio.
You hear that? Green, yellow, pink, blue, production, and studio, and that's not all of them. Because there were...
Okay, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Yeah. I was interrupting your thought. You finish your thought.
I was going to say that there were a lot of drafts that were done just between the two of us before anybody saw anything, which we really didn't have, or I would have shown them to you. But I think that this scene, when we started writing, was a lot longer, and of course it can't be longer because it would be boring and it would just be blah, 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 and we only have a certain amount of time to show the show because there was so much to say. So I think that part of the writing process is a process of winnowing down to the meat of the scene, the most important facts that you get at, and it's as important what you don't say as what you do say, sometimes more important.
And that's a process of trusting the actors and having good communication so they know what the weight is behind the lines. But as writers in here, it's important to give yourselves permission to write poorly before you write well. First drafts aren't what make it to the air. What makes it to the air are drafts that have been worked over and over again. And I think it was important for us to write the expansive version of the scene and then start winnowing it down, because then we got all the messy emotions on the page, and then we could figure out how to take that emotional template and put it behind the words that we needed for the storytelling, and to be honest and impactful in the scene.
Sometimes in the process we talk about the first time, it all goes on the page and it's all on the nose, and then the second time we take it all out, and then none of it is on the page anymore, and we think we're being really clever. But then really, it's the third time you go back and you get the best of both worlds, that you start to get on the right track.
And by third time, that could be third time, it could be 20th time.
Right.
But initially your instinct is to lean into the cliche. Your second instinct is to go anti-cliche, which is just as cliche. And by your third or fourth time through, you start to get something original. You want to go to the studio draft?
Yeah.
Studio
this-
draft?
One more. Other one.
Thanks.
There you go.
Okay, so this draft is a clean draft that doesn't have any stars on it. The stars are where all the changes are. And I tried to highlight for you the main lines of that scene that we changed. I'm sorry.
This is a Castle Martha scene.
Yeah.
Can you go down a little bit?
Yeah. So we had the Castle Martha scene kind of as a launch point to this, so we understood where Castle was coming from emotionally, because you didn't want to walk into the scene without understanding what your character's emotional point of view was. So we needed to prep the audience for that. So this
There it is.
yeah, this is sort of the first public.
You met with a man who has information about my mother's case? How do you know he's not her killer? How do you know he's not involved? Castle, how the hell did you do this to me?
That's so poetic. That's poetic exposition.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to another draft. Next draft.
Oh, and by the way, she's horrified, if you can see that. All that stuff remains, and then
Go
the
down.
stuff you highlighted is our next pass at the big scene.
But you see, you know, everything you retype on the drafts, the stars show up. So,
And that's so everybody in production knows that there's been a change there. Everybody at Studio Network, all the production heads, all the actors know, okay, the scene is changing and there are new words here.
okay, so these words weren't in the final. Yes, I do, you weren't ready, you were trying to protect yourself, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do. It's not too late. We can bury the DNA. You can walk away. No one will ever know. Aren't you glad that wasn't in the final?
But this is part of the ugly process that gets you to what's good, and you have to give yourself permission to go through this process.
Yeah.
But in it, you can see the flashes of what the scene's going to become. You know, her talking about, this is my life. You know, what are you doing here? Like, Castle, I'd just been shot. I was in a relationship. My life was in pieces. Maybe not then. How about now? After I just found out you betrayed me. And this is all, you know, this is all the text that we then needed to put into subtext.
Right.
But for Terri and I, we needed to know fundamentally what the scene was about. So oftentimes you type the crassest version of what the person is thinking.
But you can see that this was there, that we had that. And that was kind of the I love you, that was kind of the nut of the scene. And although we worked it around, it really held through all the drafts. Because it was
the honest moment.
essentially how Castle felt.
It was the honest moment, and everything else was stuff that we felt like, you know, we needed to explain, that is all the work underneath the iceberg, so that when you get the right line, it has all that emotional intent. Oh my God, she's still horrified.
I think we changed other parts in that scene about, go to the next one. Because there are no stars. Okay. Now, here, this is when, I think that when we were writing this, Beckett's response to this, because of the combination of all the emotions she's feeling, and everything that she's been through, and the fact that he had been talking to who we later found out was Mr. Smith, that is just a tremendous betrayal. And it was in a moment where she was really excited or ready to go into more of the discovery about her mother's murder, and then he lowers the boom on her.
Okay, so this is still very textual. You know, Castle, I'd just been shot, I was in a relationship. And you know what it became, because you saw the scene. She says, you're going to bring that up now, which carries all that weight. It carries all that weight of all those lines. And what you hope for in writing is the one line that implies, that allows you to cut all the crappy stuff.
And you can, I don't know about you, but I can feel it when I'm writing it. I can feel when
I'm
that
faking it. And then when the bell rings.
ball drops and the bell rings, the gun goes off, whatever it is in your head and you're feeling, where you can feel the moment. I mean, everybody has a different process and everybody writes differently. But if you find that when you're writing, you're forcing it, you're forcing a line that you love and you want to keep that line because it was so funny, but it doesn't fit, and you're doing everything around it to try to make it work, you know it's not going to work. So as a writer, you have to be able to throw away stuff that you love in order to find the truth. And that's what writing this scene was all about for us, was finding the truth of the moment for Castle and finding the truth of the moment for Beckett. And
sometimes to get the truth, you have to write blatantly before you can write poetically.
okay, what do we have next?
So this is I guess the final.
That's the final. So that's
Okay.
that's what you saw. And here's the other thing is that our actors are really great with lines, but sometimes you'll get on stage and they live in their characters. They, as much as we love Castle and Beckett and all of the other characters, and we feel that they are parts of our heart and soul, Stana and Nathan have lived those characters solely, not all the others, and they think about them. And they might come to us on the day of production and say, I think that there's something else to this that we're leaving out, or I think that I don't need to say this, I can say this with a look or a moment. And you have that conversation, and you decide in the moment whether that's true or not, and it often is. I mean, our actors are really smart, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not right, and it's often a negotiation, but it's a great negotiation because it's all for the good of the process and the final product.
It's good to be challenged on the material. Just wish it wasn't on the day of, right before you're about to shoot. This line's not working. You come up with something brilliant. Okay.
Okay, you want to show, let's see, just a second. Let me see what was next for me. So we're going to talk a little bit about the production process, so.
Well, do you want,
What?
okay, no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was wondering if the graveyard was next, but
Oh, is the graveyard next?
I don't know. I don't think
Okay.
On the slide.
All right, oh, yeah, okay.
Well, one of the things that we want to talk
I
about
dropped my
is
glasses.
sometimes you have to make cuts along the way, and sometimes when you have the idea for something, it is much better than what happens in the execution. We wanted a scene in Always between Beckett and her dad, and we wrote a scene in the graveyard where she's at her Beckett's mother's gravestone because it's that mythology, and we felt like we had to get that mythology in. And we also thought it'd be fun to tweet a gravestone that said Beckett to our fan base before they knew what the episode was about. But that was not the driving. That was not the driving force. So you saw that scene with Castle where he said, you know, you're being blinded by this. They're going to kill you. And we wrote a scene in the graveyard with Jim Beckett, and it turned out there was nothing to say in the scene because Castle already said it.
Show the script.
Yeah, show the script.
Script first.
There's the Jim Beckett scene that never happened.
Did I tell you that just before she was killed, I asked her Miller to stop her investigation? She got threatening calls. It's very textual, and we tried to make the scene work, but there was nothing more to be said after Castle said it.
Every
And-
time we wrote it, we said, what else can he say to her? Everything that we're saying in that scene that we showed you earlier.
We wanted him as a touchstone for her. We were getting close to production. We booked the actor for the episode, Scott Paulin, who's an acquaintance friend of ours, and then called him up last minute and said, we're not going to shoot the scene. We love you. We love what you would bring to this, but it's not honest storytelling. And ultimately, if you look at this, he's saying a different version of what Castle's saying, and it's just not worthwhile. And we thought it would be a more powerful moment if we allowed Beckett to have the moment. And so we talked about where she was going in the rest of the show, and what she needed to do to get there emotionally, and that we needed a scene of her making a decision after hearing what Castle said, that the audience recognizes that she heard, and she has to make a conscious decision to do something else. So we decided to make it a private moment.
Right, but for me, it was kind of hard to give it up, and yet we knew we had to give it up. It was
hard to give it up in theory because we thought in theory there was a great scene to be had there, but in practicality there was no storytelling value to it.
But for me, the center of it was, I don't want to have to visit you here too, which I thought was the most powerful thing. But I think that when you see the scene, do we have the scene? When you see the scene, you see that you don't need these words.
And visually, Beckett looking at a gravestone that says Beckett kind of does that in visual poetry.
Ready?
See that shift in our eyes? See that decision? And sometimes, as writers, we depend on words when we can depend on the pictures. And you know, it's always a constant battle because television evolved out of radio and movies evolved out of silence. And in silence, you know, the dependence was on the picture, and in radio, the dependence was on the words. And so I think sometimes when we negotiate with our partners at Studio Network, they don't necessarily trust the power of the visual. But that scene, for my taste, is much more powerful than anything that Jim Beckett and Kate Beckett would have talked about, because they would just be rehashing.
And you can see it in her eyes, you can see it in her performance. It's also, you know, did you say this about trusting your actors?
Yeah.
And I remember
Were you
the
not
moment.
listening to me?
What?
You went away? Yeah.
Yeah, I was elsewhere. I remember the moment in the room when Andrew and I were discussing this, and we were writing the Jim Beckett scene, and as we said, we were writing it over and over, and I looked at him and I said, what if we didn't have this scene? What if she was just in the cemetery? And it was like, it's totally a light bulb moment. Like, and then, oh my God, what are we going to tell Scott? And he
Scott
was
took it like a pro. He's
such a
good.
gentleman about it. And, you know, he knew that he would be in future episodes and that we love him. And, you know, it's like you have this concept from the very beginning when you're writing the script, and you say, there's got to be that iconic scene with Beckett and her dad, because he's her touchstone. And yet, it became her mother who was literally her touchstone. So it's a great moment of process, which is why I bring it up, because the process is so important. You have to go through all that other stuff. You have to write pages and pages and pages of material before you get to the final thing that's going to work for you.
We often teach writing as genius. You know, when you're in high school, you read Shakespeare and he's put up on a pedestal. But he was watching his plays being performed every night and then rewriting, because that didn't work, that didn't work. So what we got was the end of the process. I remember reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland with Ezra Pound's edits. And the edits made it. All the drivel that Pound crossed out made it a great poem. And so part of the process is being able to experiment on the page, because you know, until you film it, it's not in concrete, and to winnow away and to make those decisions. But we show it to you just to show you that some of the initial writing we do is not great, and it's part of the process of getting it to be where it is.
So here we are bearing our souls to you. I think that another really important part of the process for us are our colleagues and the other people we work with. We have 11 writers on our staff, and they're all really good at what they do. And one of the things we do is listen to their notes on some of these things. And I think that in your writing process, it's important to have people who you trust, who you can give the material to, like Ezra Pound. And it's nice to have friends like that, who can help you cut away some of the stuff that doesn't need to be there. Because you get often so deep into what you're writing that you can't see the forest for the trees. And either you need to set it down for a while and go back to it later, or have somebody else who can be a teller of truth and somebody who you trust to tell you what is working and what is not. And you know, even if you get notes and they tell you that what's working for them and what's not, you have to be the final arbiter of that. But I think that collaboration and friends and time are an important part of the process.
What's next? I'm whispering into a microphone. I don't think I can hear me. Okay. Where do you want to go next?
I was going to go to the production process. So we've taken you from the final to the production design and the editing and the special effects and all of that stuff, and now I was going to go to production. Let's see what we got.
Aww.
That was so great.
As I said, the writers follow their scripts through production, so sort of starting at the beginning of production in the backwards process, the first thing we do is we meet with the director and the AD and one of our producers, and we go through the schedule. And we find out what's producible and what's not. In those first meetings, we have the day-to-day schedule, and they tell us within 8 days we can't do all of this. You're going to have to cut some stuff, or you're going to have to change some stuff, or we have too many locations. And so the next part of the writing process is going through the script and figuring out how to tell our stories in a way that is producible.
Go to the next one.
So the process.
I think you covered it.
Then we have concept meetings where.
Oh, you want to go through the entire production process?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So,
Quickly.
yeah, when a script comes in, we sit down with all the department heads early on in our prep week. We have 7 days to prep an episode.
Clearly, we didn't prep this.
And then they go through it and they come to us with questions. What do the props look like? You know, what do you think about locations? You have a director that you're working with, and you go take a look at your locations. Sometimes you have to write for very specific locations because they don't meet the needs that you had in script. So it's
There
always
is no door there to close.
yeah, it's always a negotiation process. And then just before we shoot, the day before we shoot, we have a production meeting, which hopefully all questions have been answered, and if they haven't, whatever the remaining ones are, get answered. And you know, you just negotiate the movie magic. We want a swing set in the rain. Well, it's LA, so who's going to provide the rain? Okay, we're going to bring in a machine for the rain, which means you can only put your cameras here or here. And it's Los Angeles, so you can't see what's in the background. And these are all the decisions that we make to try and make things seamless. So that's the rain machine
Right.
on the
And
swing set.
in that day, we were at a specific location. We were at the cemetery. And so you can't just shoot one thing. You have to combine the locations to make the day. So you have to find things that are close to each other. So we set up our swing set in the cemetery.
On a lawn in the cemetery. So we went from Beckett's grave to the final swing set scene. So, you know, for Stana as an actress, she's having this moment with her mother, and then she's having the moment at the end where she's making the decision to go to Castle. It's a pretty wide change for her, and these actors do extraordinary work because they have to be in one part of the show in 1 minute and then another part of the show in the other minute. Sometimes it's a head spin for them. I can't see the side.
Okay.
Copy
Okay,
that.
that's good. All right. So anyway, the thing about the swing set was that our costume design comes to the director and says, so how many times are you going to shoot the scene?
How many sets of dry clothes do I need to put her in?
That's right. So, you know, the outfit that you see her in the rain, she had to, you know, not only do that part, but change into it several times.
Hey, with the time remaining, do you want to go through production? Or you want to go through the origin of the process and go through the notes and the whiteboards and
Let's
stuff
go
like
through the
that?
whiteboards really quick so we have time for questions.
So when you're starting an episode, you face a blank page. And before you face a blank page, you face a blank whiteboard. We have a 6-act structure that we need to fill. And at the end of each act, you generally want an act out, something that's going to bring the audience back. So these are the structural elements that we're up against. And then you sit around and you're like, okay, well, how are we going to tell this story? With this one, we knew there was a kiss at the end. Okay, let's put that up on the board. We knew that there was going to be a fight in the middle. Let's put that up on the board. We knew at an early stage that we wanted to touch the Captain Montgomery mythology, so that we have Evelyn Montgomery, so you put that up in the beginning, and you sort of start seeing a shape, a beginning, middle, and end to it. And then you're like, okay, now what? So it's launching the investigation, tracking Beckett's emotions in this, and then tracking Castle's emotion in this, and putting the scenes together. A lot of that is my handwriting, which is terrible. But basically what you'll see are the scenes or the proto-scenes. Here's what happens in the scenes. And this is a similar process that's repeated in rooms around town, whether it's index cards, whether it's writing on the whiteboard. And I'll tell you, in today's day and age with cut and paste technology, there's nothing worse than having to erase something on a whiteboard, move it, and rewrite it. You just want to have some magical something where you can cut and paste and they exist for corporate America, but we don't have the money to afford them.
We really wish that there were things for real where we could go like this across the board and things would move. That would be awesome. What we do when we're putting this up, in this particular process specifically for us, we were both in the room. We were in Andrew's office where we work, and Andrew was writing stuff on the board, and I was sitting on the couch, and we were talking about it. And we would talk about how we went through different things.
And we actually ended up changing significantly from this board. There are a couple of beats in here. What we discovered is that we had too much story at the end of the day when we started to outline it. We had to streamline that, because oftentimes, you know, you get ambitious in the story, and oftentimes you think you need more than you actually do. But a lot of the scenes are the same. You know, bullpen, Beckett starts to spin out. Castle tells her that it might just be a break-in. Maybe it has nothing to do with her mother's case. So you have that little emotional nugget, which was ends up being staged in the break room, so that ends up translating. Beckett's apartment, the truth comes out, betrayal, big ass effing fight, I love you, I love you too, but you betrayed me, exclamation point, and screaming match, he leaves. That's kind of the shorthand version of what that scene was, and that really is the heart of the scene, except there was it wasn't really a screaming match, but that's the emotional tenor of it. We knew that that's where we were going to get to. So that's what it kind of looks like in whiteboard form. And then you saw the process of how we took it from that messy thing to a series of other messy things.
So at first, can we go to the first one that's kind of empty?
Castle has to stop her. Ticking clock. Ongoing tension. It's all very exciting. But you know, the early board is a lot emptier, and it slowly gets filled in as we come up with clever ideas and not so clever ideas.
But this was a central. Beckett resigns. That was a big idea in the moment. That in order to do what she had to do, that she had to leave. And we knew that was a huge moment in the mythology.
Oddly enough, I think it comes in Act 6 in the show. It was in Act 5 for a while, but all these things move around. And once you have a piece, you're like, okay, we have this piece. We know we need to earn this piece. We know it needs to come near the end. And Alexis's speech was there because we actually had some story after they got together. And then we looked at the board and we're like, oh, we're crazy. Once they sort of kiss, we gotta get to the end of the season really quick. We can't have another act of stuff after that because nobody wants to see that. We need to save that for next season. That's next season's fun.
Right, and one of the big dilemmas we had was the Smith scene going into the next season.
Because we had the service plot, but it feels like your emotional apex. So how do you do that quickly and get out and leave just enough to tease the audience in terms of the threat that hangs over Beckett and Castle?
And how do you do anything else after they kiss?
Yeah, and sometimes you have to honor that. You're like, okay, it's like, you know, in wine tasting, you kind of have to go in order, because if you have the big, bold wine that blows out your taste buds, you can't come back to your soft, subtle wine. So the kiss is that. It kind of blows out everything, and we knew our audience would sort of be done and in that moment. So we had all this material afterwards that we're just, you know, Terri and I are looking at each other, we're like, we're crazy, what are we doing?
Right.
So sometimes it's a process of the story declaring itself to you, and you realizing what it wants to be.
But you know, we struggle with it. It was a conversation, and we talked about all the different permutations, and how could we put the kiss first, how could we put Mr. Smith first, how do we end the season on a cliffhanger? You want to go to the cliffhanger, and you want people to come back again to see what's going to happen, but you also don't want to take away from your moments.
Do you want to take a couple questions, just because we have
Yeah,
about 6
I'll
minutes
just say
left?
really quickly that from the whiteboard, we go to outline, we send the outline in, and then from the outline goes to script.
Do you have the outline?
No.
Okay, well, let's not show it.
I think it's time to go to questions.
Yeah, right there.
I saw you first.
Hi. Well, first of all, it's been a pleasure to hear you talk about the entire process, especially the writing process. And what I'd like to know is, what is it like working together as a husband and wife, you know, writing? What is it like to be each other's writing partner, especially on episodes like this?
It's both fabulous and horrible.
And what's the
it's good
process
stuff.
like?
She was asking what the process is like as husband and wife working together.
Now, does the answer make sense?
No, you know, we're each other's favorite people, but we're both really opinionated, and we like to think that out of that comes something better than if we had just done on our own. So we each fight for our own point of view, and we're each usually right in our own way, and it challenges us to get to a place where all of the material is better. But that doesn't mean, it's like, look, you know, the last thing you want to do is give your spouse notes, or, you know, say that their stuff isn't working, because you want them to talk to you at the end of the day. But sometimes she needs to tell me, hey, you know, that's not going to work, you're crazy, or I need to tell her, hey, that's not going to work, you're crazy, in a slightly more tactful way.
Or sometimes not.
But it does have its own complications. Ultimately, it's a painful, wonderful, frustrating, maddening process.
You know, and writing is painful when you do it on your own anyway. And so this is double your pleasure, double your fun. But we also have a really different process, which is interesting. And when we started writing, we did not write together. We met because we both won a writing award, and we had never met before that. And then we have very separate careers until Castle. So we had done a pilot before
Yeah, we've
together.
done a couple pilots together before that.
Yeah. And it had been the same thing where Andrew's process is very internal. He's thinks about it, he likes to think about it quietly, and I like to talk about it. So it's like sometimes he'll say, "Why are you talking?"
You can't solve this problem if you keep talking.
But I can't solve this problem if you don't tell me what you're thinking.
And Terri tends to go more from the inside out, from the emotional points of view of the character. I tend to be more of a structuralist. What is the structure of the story we're telling? Which is why it's a good combination. But also early on in the process, it's very Mars Venus. We're having completely different conversations about completely different things. And we sort of meet in the middle, and as we get closer to the script, the process becomes easier. But it's I think a very productive process. But when we're in the early stages, I think that we have to be very forgiving with each other because we're speaking completely different languages.
But we've kind of gotten used to that. We know that, okay, we're going to do this, and this is coming. And once we get through this, it's going to be delightful. So that's really our process. I think some people, you know, everybody works differently together, but because we're such different people, it's explosive. But like you said, I think that's some of what makes it really good.
Yeah.
Questions?
Who else? How about
Let's-
back there with your hand up by the wall?
Talking about your writing staff, how often do you have to rehire for your writing staff?
We generally do an evaluation at the end of every season. We have a good core group, a lot of whom have been with us since the beginning. You know, sometimes people are off contract and decide to take other opportunities because they want to spread their wings. You know, they were a young writer when they came to us. They want to be perceived differently. Sometimes we like to hire new people just to keep the voice of the show growing. But generally, contracts are, you know, you offer a 3-year contract, which means that if you want them for 3 years, you have them. But at the end of every year, we have the right not to pick them up. But I think we've been very fortunate. We have some really good, really talented folks on our staff.
In the middle,
How does it work divided among the writers? Do you give them a assignment for an episode or for scenes? How does that work?
Well, generally a writer will pitch an idea for an episode. We'll go into pitch sessions where everybody talks about, you know, what would be interesting, what would be fun, what would fit with the Castle Beckett trajectory. And then if we like an idea, that writer will generally go through this process we're talking about with some folks in the room. There'll be 3 or 4 people in the room working on filling in all the holes. We like to do breaks that are at the most 3 weeks to get the process up. People have told us it's a particularly challenging show. At ABC, there's a 6-act structure where most other procedurals are told in a 4-act plus teaser. So we have to come up with 2 more act outs, which makes our cases a little bit more complicated than they would be if they were, say, on another network. But we lean into that and hope that that's part of the fun. After that process, they go off to outline. That writer goes off to outline, generates an outline in 4 or 5 days, and then hopefully they have between 7 days and 2 weeks to write the draft.
and in between those times, once the writer has probably been through in the process of breaking the story on the board, they create a story arena, which is a 1-page document that we then send to the network and the studio, and we get approval from them for the go-ahead or not, and usually it's the go-ahead. And then they will go back to the outline, and then that goes to the studio and network, and we are given notes. And all along the process, through the script process, we are given notes by the studio and network, which we're finding to be very smart and helpful, because they're our first real audience, and they help us figure out what's making sense, what's not making sense, and how the continuity of the show that they have questions about. So that's a very good relationship.
Over there. Yeah.
Have you thought about doing a murder in the old ones?
Well, since we've already done a murder in the old haunt, and that's how we ended up buying it, it felt like it would be a little repetitive to us. So we're looking for a good justification to go back. How about right here?
Okay.
So we hear that you're going to be taking on Philip Marlowe. How is it different taking on a character that kind of is established and people know versus a character like Castle that's fresh and you're kind of out of your own imagination?
We're actually very excited about it, and we're going to be writing a Philip Marlowe that has a modern voice, and so that process is going to be really interesting to us and challenging in a great way.
We feel like that bringing a freshness to a timeless character without betraying who that character is actually the key to making it work contemporary. Because I think if you try to do the noir version, it's not going to be successful and it's not going to connect. So part of, I think, our challenge is actually bringing that freshness to it, even though it's an established character.
And who he is going to be exciting for television, I think.
Hopefully. All the way and back.
Yeah.
I wondered, how far ahead did you plan the whole story with Castle and Beckett? Because if you go back, which I've done recently, and look at the whole series from the beginning, then you see a lot of foreshadowing, or at least I thought I saw a lot of foreshadowing.
We have a general sense of what we'd like to do, and we do drop hints along the way. The specifics, I think, announce themselves as we deal with the various episodes and what's organic to the characters. We just try to be truthful and honest to the characters and where they are in the relationship, and there's some things that we have pulled up, and there's some things that we've delayed just because we felt like the characters weren't ready to be in that moment yet.
I saw an orange hat. or the black hat with the red on the front.
Yeah, I was wondering, Castle, one thing that's done a lot is you have wonderful homages to different movies and pop culture, things like that. Aside from even just the Firefly references dropped in, you have entire episodes that are homages to Rear Window and things like that. I was wondering how you decide what you'd like to do next with that. Like, how do you decide what do you do next, and how do you decide when is too much of it is too much, or?
You know, I think you can only get away with a couple of those a year, you know, one or two. Otherwise, it feels like you've run out of ideas and you're just cribbing from the movies. But, you know, Terri and I are passionate about film. We're passionate about contemporary film and about old film. We go to film festivals. You know, we love it. So oftentimes the story will present itself like, wow, wouldn't it be great to do that from Castle's point of view? And doing a Rear Window where Castle, with his active imagination, is in that situation was just so delicious to us. And you know, we're both Hitchcock fans, as are a number of folks on the staff. So, you know, we've had references to
Strangers on a Boat.
Yeah, Strangers on a Journey with the Double Down, and a number of others, as well as references within the shows, because everybody in this room, everybody in our culture is generally culturally literate about this stuff, and if something presents as, say, you know, if a guy's making meth, of course you're going to do a Breaking Bad reference, just because it's out there in the universe. So, you know, we want our characters to reflect where the culture is, and Castle, being in a media-centric universe, being a novelist, would have a hyper-awareness of that and would take great delight in something like that.
So we feel like it's very in character for Castle to do those things, and that's what makes it comfortable for us. But we do sometimes say, okay, this is one step too far.
Anybody else, right?
To expand on the story structure question earlier, something I've always been curious about TV, being a feature screenwriter. When you create a series, does the life of a TV series kind of match the paradigm of a screenplay, where in your head, before you even start, you know, this is pretty much going to be our first act, even though it may be 1 year, 2 years, this is kind of going to be the middle part of the story the next few years, and then the, you know, the finale where you know the ending, you know, as soon as you start, pretty much. Or is it totally organic, where each year, each episode, kind of you let the characters lead you where you're going?
It depends on the show. You can create a show with a DNA that has a beginning, middle, and end, knowing where you're going to end up. I think Breaking Bad's a good example. I think Vince probably knew where that was going to end up. I think whether you like it or not, Damon Lindelof always had an understanding of where he was going to end Lost. I think some shows are designed to follow the characters because we're in love with the characters, and we follow them as long as their lives are interesting. So, you know, if you look at a show like MASH, the Korean War needs to end at some point. The show ran longer than the war. And with something like that, as long as you're maintaining audience's interest, you can keep going forever. The Simpsons is designed around the characters never growing. And because they never grow, it's a comfortable experience that you can tell, you know, 500 episodes with it. So it really depends on what story you choose to tell, because the television format is accepting enough of a lot of different kinds of storytelling. And you know, the stuff on cable generally feels like it's more of the drawn-out feature over several years, whereas the stuff on episodic TV, keep it going until it runs out of steam and then find an elegant way to get out.
So for you guys, is there a grand story arc, and then the writers get to like pin episodes to the timeline, you know, wherever when you need to like stretch it out, or is it totally always new?
I know where I think the show organically wants to end, and is there storytelling beyond that? Sure. But I think that you find the point where the audience has enjoyed the characters as much as they can, and they're ready for something new. And
Which leads me to a very good segue to say, this is where this organically naturally ends.
Thank you guys very much.